Welcome into the show today. It's your host, Jake, at the Productive Point of View, and I have with me Tanner Johnston. Tanner, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. This is my actually first recording in the evening, kind of after work hours. So welcome to
Oh
the
yeah.
evening edition of the Productive Point of View.
Oh yeah. That's true. I usually don't do this in the evening, but yeah. No, it's
Yeah,
it's kind of nice. The house is kind of quiet. I got to be kind of got to keep my voice down because kids sleeping in the other room.
that's right. So we'll keep the characters to a minimum, I guess, this episode, huh? Cool. So Tanner, what are you up to? What do you graphic design, motion graphics? You do a bunch of stuff. What do you do all day?
Oh yeah, I do all kinds of stuff. My day job is I work at West Texas A&M University, which is in Canyon, Texas, south of Amarillo,
Hmm.
a little bit. I do online multimedia for them. They're trying to up their game as far as online multimedia and trying to make sure that there's a good source of like whenever they're teaching an online class, instead of it just being a talking head, it being more like I don't know if you've ever seen those videos on YouTube of like Vox and stuff, and
Hmm.
they do a really good job of integrating motion graphics or anything from like National Geographic that talks about history and that kind of stuff. When you
Okay.
see those kind of graphics, we're not doing exactly that stuff, but it's in our mindset, and we're trying to get towards something kind of like that.
Okay.
I started using the phrase. I begrudgingly started using the phrase edutainment,
Okay.
um, to kind of talk about how that might exist, and how if you can make it to be an evergreen property, or an evergreen subject matter, that you
Hmm.
won't have to recreate these things over time, and you can spend more time in the more critical thinking aspects of education rather than just the teaching. But that's my personal kind of slant on it. For the most part, I just shoot videos and lecture videos and make sure the audio is good and the video is good, and making support graphics and that kind of thing. And then
Great.
I moonlight as a freelance designer, doing music video stuff, or just whatever comes my way.
That's cool. And as creative goes, right? Like almost
Yeah,
everybody has a,
right.
a side gig as a creative because
Yes,
it just kind of bleeds
gotta
out
get
of
that
you,
side
right?
hustle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, cool. So, and we were talking a little bit beforehand, and you said you're kind of a one man band over there. So it, you started, you said with a degree in graphic design, but
Mm-hmm.
you've kind of
Yeah.
turned into this account manager, project manager, like all the things,
Yeah,
right?
so over time, like I got my degree and I wanted to be the graphic designer kind of guy, but those jobs don't exist the way that they used to.
Hmm.
And I had to play to my strengths. I'm not a very creative person, just right out of the box. I can't think of crazy ideas and make them come to life in a really great way. I'm much more practical.
Hmm.
Like everything has to have a purpose, and a lot of times when you're just making stuff super fast, things can feel superficial, and that kind of takes the wind out of my sails.
Right.
And so I had to find ways to get it back,
Hmm.
my motivation back. And so I started thinking of things as a way of just like rapid problem solving,
Hmm.
how to be utility to people who are in the business world, and maybe they don't understand how the creative world works, or why creatives say certain things or think certain ways, or get upset about seemingly innocuous type things.
Right.
And so I thought, like, what, I can be almost like a translator between that, these two worlds, as well as kind of a Swiss Army knife of knowing, if I'm not an expert in it, at least knowing enough of the basics so that I can understand what kind of issues might come up.
Hmm.
Like if you're like, all right, let's do a video shoot, and we're going to do this, this, and this, and we're going to be outdoors, and we're going to be doing all these things. My mind tells me like, well, if we're going to be outdoors, it might be noisy. We might, what does our audio situation look like? Do we need to rent some extra audio or some extra equipment so that we can make sure we get good, voice recordings, so that they don't have to come back later and try to, like do an overdub of themselves? Or,
Right.
what kind of, like, how ambitious are we getting with this project? What's the budget look like? All that kind of stuff. And just seeing if it can translate into a real world deliverable. Um, and so that doesn't require the same kind of creativity that coming up with something that no one's ever seen before, like some
Yeah.
kind of visual spectacle. That's a more of a creativity that has to do with understanding the technology, the tools, how all the pieces come together, and being able to problem solve with all that. So while I do a lot of production stuff still, shooting video, editing video, doing special effects and motion graphics, and then even just traditional graphic design, type layout, logos, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, the thing that I found that I leverage the most is just being able to coordinate all that stuff, which is, yeah, that's my title at WT, is a coordinator of online media production. So,
Oh yeah. Yeah. So man, that's a ton. It seems like Swiss Army knife is definitely a good way to put it. Uh, when I was talking to you in Slack and was discussing getting on on the mic here with you, you were saying that you had, because you do so much and you had to figure it out, that you kind of had to like redo your life almost in a way that made sense
Yeah.
to figure all this out, right?
Oh yeah, and that's actually happened fairly recently. I'm
Okay.
kind of on this new kick of life, of just kind of thinking in this way, because for a long time I graduated. I've been doing this type of work for about 10 years. Actually, I think this is the 10th year.
Okay.
So I get to say that I've been doing it for a decade now.
Yay.
Yeah, right. And I worked probably until about 18 months ago. I worked as, just trying to be creative, trying to make cool things, trying to put it out in the world, and that kind of thing. And things weren't connecting in the way that I wanted to. And it all kind of culminated, and I was forced into a position where I just had to figure it out, because I had a wife, a 3-year-old, and I worked at an entertainment company called Hastings Entertainment. And if you know anything about that company, they went under and dissolved completely.
Yep.
Just about a year or so ago.
Yep.
And so I had been there for a little while. I was working in Denver, but I wanted to move back to be with my family in Amarillo, Texas. So I came and I moved back to here, working at a place called Anderson Merchandisers. They did a lot of like music sales and stuff, which not doing too great. So I actually got fired or let go 6 months into that, just because they were restructuring some things and the company had moved somewhere. And then from that's when I got the Hastings jobs. And then 6 months later from that, they said, that they were shutting down, and I was let go at that point too. So I had gone through, multiple things. I had a kid that was having some like ear troubles and stuff, and we had to do, like tube surgeries for the ears, and that plus bouncing between these different jobs meant that I had paid about 80% of my deductible like 3 times over before I ended up losing the job, and then had to start a new deductible just on this. So there was a lot of things just kind of culminating with this idea of like, it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how hard you work. Life's just going to, come at you and you're screwed. There's nothing you can do. And I was in a position where we were paying our rent, and we had gotten to the point where I had a buddy who told me, he's a financial planner, and I said, what's the best thing a person can do? And he said, make sure you have 6 months of living expenses just sitting somewhere that you have access to. That way you essentially have 6 months of runway if you ever suddenly become unemployed. And I had done that. And after this Hastings thing, I stretched that from 6 months to 9 months. But after that, like it was coming down to the point where we were about to like lose our house, the house we were renting and stuff. We were going to have to move in with my wife's parents and stuff. And we were seriously looking at that. And I was about 1 week away from having to go talk to the landlords and tell them the situation and just be like, all right, because we didn't do a contract with them or anything, but they were like, you need to be on time. And I was just straight up going to tell them like, we have 1 month left. We're going to pay that month. And then at the end we have to leave because no income. And, as I approached that point, I started thinking, about, that's whenever I started thinking about me as a designer and how can I play to my advantages and all this kind of stuff. And, graphic designers always, they gripe about marketers. Oh, the marketers, they don't understand, whatever, and all this kind of stuff. But I kept seeing like marketing jobs pop up, and I was like, well, maybe I can do marketing, or something like that. I kind of live in that world. Or people would talk about social media all the time. Oh, social media influencers. We got to do this, that, and the other. And I saw a couple job postings for people looking for social media, which, quick sidebar on that, it's kind of funny to see social media posts where it's like, you must have 10 years of experience. And it's like, these things haven't been around that long. So people are finding somebody that was doing Instagram before Instagram existed.
That's right. That's somebody who hadn't been in the industry 10 years.
And they just put out that boilerplate stuff like, oh, you have to have experience. And so I started interviewing with these people, and it just became more and more obvious that what people were looking for is somebody that just knew what was going on kind of and could navigate it and weren't intimidated by it. Because it was a bunch of people who, I think one of the youngest people that I was in the room with when I was interviewing was like 43 or 44. And whenever I say all this, it's multiple job interviews over, a couple different things. And they essentially, I got the impression that like people they didn't have the time to figure it all out, and they didn't really get what was going on. And I don't necessarily get what's going on either, but I feel comfortable pursuing that knowledge, and being part of that scene and all that kind of stuff. And so that's how I started like pitching myself is like, you know what? I'm somebody that gets results. I get things done. I can figure things out. I'm not intimidated about learning or anything like that. Change and stuff don't worry me.
Right.
And through kind of BSing my way through those interviews, I started like reflecting on it and going, you know what, I kind of, that stuff's kind of true about me. So I doubled down on it and started looking at, more job opportunities that would allow me to do that kind of thing, and pitching myself as someone who was more of a coordinator, of these faceted multimedia projects. And then the West Texas A&M job came up. I didn't even know what it was really. I just threw in my resume because I was on unemployment at the time, and I had to fill out X amount of resumes a month. Sure. And I was over 100 at that point that I had jobs that I had applied for over the previous months. And that was just one extra one that I sent out. And whenever they asked me to come in and interview, I went back and actually read the job description. I was like, oh crap, how am I going to talk to them about this? And I went back and I sat down and I was like, okay, so what do y'all want to do? And they were like, well, we don't really know. We just kind of like threw this thing together because we don't really know what we want it to be. And as they started talking, I got excited. I think at one point I just said, oh, like, it dawned on me like in the middle as they're talking. And I was like, wait, so you're trying to do this, this, and this? And they're like, yeah, that sounds like something. And I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds so cool. And I just went off and I just talked for a while. And then they all just kind of sat there and they're like, yeah, that sounds really great. And then on my drive home, because you go in for a job interview, you do that kind of stuff, and you're like, man, I hope I hear back from those people, just period. And then I hope if I do hear back, it's something positive and that it's soon, And I'm sitting here thinking, like, on the drive back, I'm thinking, man, how did I do in that interview? And then the other half of my brain is thinking, like, should you go to your landlord's house right now, or should you go tomorrow to tell them that you can't stay in the house anymore? You're out of money.
Yep.
And so I was like balancing these two, ideas in my head. And then that night, one of the main guys called me up and they were like, yeah, we think you're our guy. So within, 4 hours from leaving their office, they had decided like, yeah, that's our guy. And so I got excited about it, and I just researched so much, and started going through all this stuff, all the while thinking about like how to schedule, how to get things done. Because in the past, I had just been told what to do. Like, hey, you do this. And I go, oh, okay, I'll get it done. And I was good at that, but now having to be my own boss essentially, and like coming up with a schedule for researching. Like, if nobody tells you to research stuff or nobody tells you to look things up, how do you do it? What are you going to do? And how do you know that what you're doing is actually useful and you're not like procrastinating and telling yourself that it's research?
Sure.
Because that was a pit that I fell into a couple times, and I had to start kind of self-auditing. Looking into things about, like mindfulness and knowing yourself better and understanding, traps that you get caught in, keeping, all that kind of whatever. And so going down that road, I knew I had to keep good on these essentially promises that I told these people, that I'd gotten this job for.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of went down that road of the productivity and all that kind of stuff. And so I think the conversation you referred to when we first started talking is whenever I said I got my life back that way.
Yeah.
That had to do with the fact that I would just kind of sit around and wait for people to tell me to do things. And I would meet other people's expectations because I felt like that was my job. Like, I need to be good enough at my job so that when someone comes up to me and says, hey, do this, that I'm like, okay. And I do a good job. And as long as I keep doing that, I will be successful in life, with the impression I got, like, growing up and everything. Because that's what high school and stuff was.
Sure.
But then it wasn't until all that kind of happened and all that situation that I had just described, that I was like, you know what, I've got to figure this out on my own. And I did, like the self-help things, and I went out and read books and I did all this kind of stuff, and read books like, Eat That Frog, if you've ever heard that book. And it started to dawn on me, the difference between people that get stuff done and the people that don't get stuff done is you just do it. It's not knowing stuff. It's whether or not you do it. So people can know that the book exists and they can read it and they can be like, yeah, I totally agree with this. And they can go on Facebook and talk about how much they agree with it and how important it is and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But unless you actually like do it, it doesn't matter. So I started doing like little experiments with myself and making these little, not tests per se, but like almost like bets or like guilt tripping myself. Because I've never been the type of person that like, where it's like, oh, you can do it, push through it, go harder, faster, that kind of stuff. I hate it and it irritates me. So how do I kind of get motivation, get a fire going?
You gamify yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And so I started thinking of it like exactly like a video game, like, all right, if I've got these things, how can I work and how can I do this thing? And I started like, for a while I would do freelance to pay the bills, and that, oh my gosh, like I'd get a pit in my stomach. just trying to think, okay, I've got to make this much money. And, if this guy doesn't pay me on time, then I'm going to be screwed, and all this kind of stuff. And, things like Christmas just became like a nightmare because it was like, I want to get my kid some cool stuff for Christmas, but at the same time, I don't know where that money's going to come from. And even if I do have money now, like I think at one point I made something like 15 grand in 30 days, like in a month, I made 15 grand. And I was like, man, this is awesome. And that was kind of early in my freelancing. And then I don't think I made another penny until like 6 months later or something like that. And so, like, it was just one of those things where no one told me that that was going to happen. And I had gotten used to, as silly as it sounds, I had gotten used to getting a paycheck, every couple days or every, whatever.
Yeah. You just kind of run that whole path down. Because I know when I started out on my freelancing and my own consulting my first time, it was like the first 6 months were like, this is the life. And everyone's sending me business because they know I'm out there now. And then as soon as I reached the edge of my second level of friends, just gone.
Yeah,
like, business was gone. I was like, I hadn't been marketing. I hadn't been doing any of that stuff. And it's like,
it's one of those things that it's one of those traps of freelancing that you don't really think about until you're doing it. But it's like, while you're doing the work, you're doing the work. You're not advertising for yourself.
Right. Exactly.
You're not out there pounding the pavement. But pounding the pavement doesn't actually get you any money. Like, nobody pays you to go out and find projects, but that's the only way you're going to get paid. Right. And so it's like this, like, I don't know, it starts getting really crazy. Just that kind of mind space. And I was very unaccustomed to that because I'm somebody who, I need my own time to myself. Like, I give whoever is my boss, quote unquote, they get to own me for however long they pay for. But then after that, it's me time, it's whatever I get. And I was very against doing any kind of work for anybody outside of that bubble, if that makes sense. So whenever it was like, oh, you need to go find new work, and I was like, I'm not going to work for free, that kind of idea. And it was stupid because it hurts me.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. It was a really weird headspace, and I don't think I ever really got over it. Because I ended up getting this other job, and I shifted gears a little bit to where freelance now was, I based all my budget and everything off of my day job. And now freelance was a thing that I used to get, to level up. Like we were talking about, like the video game analogy.
Right.
Like if I was like, okay, I want, let's say furniture. Like I see some furniture and I'm like, ooh, I want to build that. I think I can build it. And if I'm going to build it, then I'm going to, I'll go watch a bunch of YouTube videos about people that build stuff. And I'm like, okay, I need a table saw and I need this thing and I need this thing. And I start naming it all. And then I've got all this stuff in my head. And then somebody comes up to me and they're like, oh, hey, we need a video. Can you help us? How much do you charge for video or whatever? And my brain says, okay, I bet I can get a table saw and a bandsaw out of this guy. I start thinking in that way. Like, hey, I'll do a video for one table saw.
Freelance is Craigslist for you, is what you're saying.
Yeah, kind of, in a way.
It's like, I'm going to go sell this so I can do this.
Oh, yeah. And it freed me up a lot too, mentally. And so that's how I fought the burnout. Yeah. Or that kind of idea of that little spiral that I went down a minute ago of that kind of not self-loathing, but just fighting yourself, making decisions and feeling justified in them, but even though they're hurting you.
Right.
That's how I managed to, without being quit being a sissy, get over it. Because I don't respond well to that stuff. The way I turned the tables on it was, you know what? If you do this work, you get to have this stuff that you want, or whatever. And it doesn't, your kid's ability to eat and have shelter over their head isn't necessarily dependent because that's taken care of by something else. Sure. So that's where my motivation started coming from, is the idea of putting one foot in front of the other. Yeah. And being able to actually see progress, because they sit around from day to day and you wake up and today feels the same as yesterday. And you do that for a while. And then one day you wake up and you realize oh my gosh, it's been 3 months, it's been 6 months, or it's been a year and I haven't done anything. I'm no closer to anything. In fact, I may be in a worse position, because interest on credit cards, that doesn't pause if your life pauses. It just keeps building up. And so, yeah, that's how I started kind of getting my life back, is being able to be okay, look, I can make this progress and I can do this thing. And I started I started thinking of time in a different way too. Like instead of thinking like, oh, I'm going to play some video games, I'm going to, you know, have free time and I'm going to sit down. I think it was like Henry Rollins. I don't know if he was the first guy to say this, but he, you know, the lead singer of Black Flag.
Yep.
He said something like, yeah. He said something like there's no such thing as free time or personal time or alone time or busy time or anything like that. He said, all you have is time.
Right.
And everybody has it, and you just, you know, do whatever you can with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, so this, I think it's a great transition into how I love to end each episode. And that's really, so you've had, from some great personal experience, sounds like you made some great just pivots yourself on how to like harness all this like stuff, this creativity, this, you know, kind of some self-doubt and some fear that you pushed through and whatnot, whatever. So if you had to tell somebody one thing to go try tomorrow for themselves to help them just get kind of, you know, in a better spot mentally. Like I think a lot of this has really just been, you know, mind stuff that you're talking about. What would that one thing be that you'd tell somebody to go out and try for themselves tomorrow?
Well, I'm sure you figured out just talking to me just now. I have a hard time with one thing.
Sure. Nobody
just,
ever
you know,
gets one.
Just saying one thing.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something, you know, that I had some mental issues and that I pushed past them. Thank you for one, but at the same time, I would say that I haven't necessarily pushed past them, but I've like kind of, I've acknowledged that they're there and they're always going to be there, and I can't get rid of them. And so I just need to learn how to deal with them. So knowing yourself is incredibly important. People talk about things like transcendental meditation or mindfulness and those kind of ideas. There's some really basic concepts out there in the world that will probably really help a lot of people. Things like being emotionally intelligent, like understanding. Like one of the things that I started applying in my own life, it was one of those things like we said, eat the frog, you know, people hear it and they agree with it, but they don't actually do it. Right. One thing that I actually started doing is I heard somebody say this once: your emotions are never wrong, but how you react to your emotions or how you use them to justify your actions, that can often be wrong. So I said, and I like to throw another quote in there as a theory is only as good as its ability to make predictions. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Three?
No, a theory.
A theory.
A theory is only as good as its ability to make predictions.
Okay.
So if somebody's like, oh, evolution existed, well, how do you know? Well, if I'm right, then we should be able to look over in this continent and see this type of thing.
Right.
That's how it works in science.
Right.
So if your emotions are always, so in my mind thinking like, all right, if my emotions are always right, it's just my reactions that are bad. Maybe I could do this exercise. And what I would do is anytime I would feel something, I would immediately acknowledge what I was feeling. I would think about why I felt that way. Was it the way that they said something, you know, or whatever? And at first I was really clunky and I felt so dumb doing it. But I just kept reminding myself the difference between people that do something and don't do something, you know, is a world of difference. So I would just think through it and I would be like, all right, now where do I want to go from here? Like if somebody came up to me and they're like, oh, you're an idiot. All the stuff you make is crap. I might want to defend myself, but I'm thinking like, all right, what are they getting at? Like, are they just mad at me for something? Did I do something to them? How can I pivot and put the situation where I want it to go or learn from it? Or, you know, like what do I want to get out of it? And that's actually led to some situations where people will talk to me or something like that. And I'll just leave it altogether. Like I'll just let them have the last word, which is something in the past that has been very difficult for me. So that idea of mindfulness and knowing yourself and practicing and doing it and paying attention as you do it. I'm terrible at writing stuff down. Journals don't make any sense to me. I like the idea. I just never do them. But at the same time, paying attention. Like I spend a lot of time in the shower. You know, you have those arguments with yourself in the shower. And you always win. And one day I had this thought of like, well, what if I lost a shower argument? What would that look like? So I started, anytime I would start practicing this idea of catching myself. Like if I was in my own head having an argument and I was like, no, you did this because you're arrogant. And I'm like in my mind telling someone off, you know, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. I've started an exercise and I've gotten pretty good at it. If I catch myself doing that, I immediately try to switch people, like switch characters.
Okay. Yep.
So it gives me a third person perspective on that interaction. And now I'm sitting here going like I'm battling against myself. And I'm saying like, well, I felt this way and I, you know, whatever. And it gives me insight into maybe what they were going through. And usually what it ends up being is like, you know what, maybe there's a bit more to this whole situation and I just don't have all the facts. And that brings me back to a good middle ground. And I can either talk to that person about it or most likely it just like teaches me to not take things so seriously. Just
right. Or it dissipates because you haven't push back.
Yeah.
Because you just step back from it a little bit and go, all right, what do they really want here? That's great, man.
For sure.
That's fantastic. I love that. And it's funny because we go through these episodes and some people have like really practical, like write down all your things and do the first 3 on your list before 9:06 a.m.
Yeah.
And then there's something like you where it's like, just slow down and ask yourself a question, and they're all so effective. So I really appreciate the answer.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, I think that speaks to the idea that people just need to learn themselves. Like not everything works for everybody else.
Right.
One of the things that I do, I early on, I said, I'm good at learning stuff. I feel comfortable saying that because I have good results from trying to learn stuff. And one of the things that helps me learn stuff really well is I will look up what the basics are, and I'll take online classes or do whatever just on YouTube, but I'll learn the basics from like 10 different people just because each person approaches it differently. And I've learned that when people are trying to teach you something, they come at it a certain way because they perceive it a certain way.
Definitely.
Like I probably talk about audio and video from the perspective of a graphic designer. So if I taught you the basics of video or audio, you would I would say a bunch of weird crap that a person that would be traditionally trained in that wouldn't say.
Totally.
Anyway, I'm going off on another tangent. I'm doing my thing. I didn't even get to say the stuff that I was going to say that I was alluding to whenever I originally sent you that message in Slack, which the smallest version I can condense it down to is if you ever want to do something, as soon as you decide that you want to do it, look at your calendar, put like an end date of when you want to do it, and then work backwards. And then start subdividing and say like, all right, I want to make, like if I'm a graphic designer and I want to make my own products to sell on Etsy or something, and I want it to be Christmas cards. And that thought might just like, oh, it might be like, oh, cool. I wonder if I could make my own Christmas cards. Immediately look at the calendar. It's November 1st. You need to have product out to people by, the 15th of December by the latest, and start working backwards. That gives you X amount of, what is it, like 6 weeks?
Yep.
If you can only work on it during the weekend, it looks like this in hours, and then start making landmarks of like, okay, if I work on this, I need to have something that looks like it's in this state by this time, which means I have 6 hours. What can I do in 6 hours? Because what can I do in 6 hours is a much different question to ask yourself than what would a Christmas card look like if I made it?
Man.
Because that's infinite.
Yeah.
And so if you start boxing things in like that and doing it for yourself, you control that. You live in that world. And that's how I started saying that my calendar, it allowed me to take control of my life. I live by my calendar now, not in a slavish way, but in an encouraging way, because it gets me into that level up video game mindset. I was like, oh yeah, I've got this many hours. And sometimes I just let stuff go, or I have it take a back seat and I'll catch it on the next wraparound, or something like that.
Yeah. One of my guests, Krista, she said, I was gonna say one of my guests, Krista, said that discipline is freedom, because she found that when she kind of went down that same similar path, it opened her up to do these ideas that she would come up with, and that she had been talking, and she enjoyed talking, but she just felt like there was this gap, and she's like, you know what? When I actually put some rails on this stuff, I felt free, not enslaved by it. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I love it, man. Tanner, man, I really appreciate the time. This has been awesome. There's a ton of good stuff we're going to have to dig through here just in production to figure out what's going to be promos, right? So thanks for the time again. And you know what? Any place you want to send people to see some of your work or what you got going on?
My day job keeps me busy, and my freelance, I just usually pick up the odd job here and there.
Okay.
So I don't curate myself very well. But if you go to tanner.tv, TV is in television, tanner.tv, you'll see a couple of lyric videos that I've done for GoD Media. But yeah, I just do whatever.
You're right on, man. Cool. Well, appreciate the time today, and talk to you again soon, hopefully.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Tim. All right. Bye.